I'm gonna start though by just kind of doing this. It's kind of fun. These are called Chuck Taylors. I wore them up until I was probably about in 7th or 8th grade, right? Basketball shoes were not really a thing. I mean, ABA, NBA players, we all wore Chuck Taylors, right? I remember that. And so Chuck Taylor was actually a semi-pro basketball player who traveled around the country in the early 20th century. And when he got done playing basketball, he went to work for Converse shoes, and he sold a lot of these, and so they named the shoe after him. But that's not why I'm talking about Chuck Taylor shoes. I'm talking about Chuck Taylor shoes because of this. This is the sole of a Chuck Taylor shoe. You'll see that it's got this interior square checkerboard pattern, but around it you see all these vertical lines. And those vertical lines you might think are there to help give you a good grip on a basketball court. And I would tell you, if you ever wore Chuck Taylors on a basketball court, you will know that's not why they're there. They're there because there is this thing called import taxes. They've been in the news a lot this week. They're called tariffs. There's a 20% tariff on every athletic shoe that is imported into our country. 20% on athletic shoes. And 98.4% of all athletic shoes are made somewhere else. And so you pay a lot for your Jordans because you got a 20% tariff on them. And the good folks at Converse realized that that was a problem. They couldn't sell these shoes, which really now were no longer really a part of the basketball world. They'd become kind of a fashion statement, unless they came up with what is called some creative way to engineer the shoe to avoid the tariff. It's actually a thing, this thing called tariff engineering. What you see right here outside of this little rubber sole is what looks like a bunch of very small little nubs that stick up. And what it is, it's compressed felt. And it turns out that what makes something not experience a import tax of 20% in America is that you don't make an athletic shoe, you make a slipper. And it turns out what makes something a slipper is if you have a certain percentage of felt on the bottom of the shoe. And so what they did is they put exactly the amount of felt around the shoe to avoid the import tax. It's tariff engineering. Now here's what's interesting about that. Tariff engineering might allow you to escape the US government's ire, but truth engineering does not allow you to escape our Lord's intention. And what is going on in the Sermon on the Mount is there's been a lot of truth engineering. Let me just remind you, as we begin to walk you through this, Connor did a great job of showing you that what Jesus is gonna do is say, you guys have truth engineered my intention. And he's walking you through basically commandments 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 in Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 all the way down through 48. And he brackets this little section by saying this: unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you're not getting into heaven. These guys who tell you that they're righteous with all their little laws and rules and interpretations of them, they're not righteous. You got to be perfect like your heavenly Father is perfect. And here's the kingdom ethic for a kingdom people. And so if you want to be righteous, this is what righteousness means. And so he gives you this. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 21, he gives you a command, and he quotes the 6th commandment, thou shalt not murder. And Jesus uses something 6 different times in this section. He says, you have heard it said, but I say to you. You have heard it said, but I say to you. And what he's doing, he's saying, you have truth engineered God's intention. But I'm telling you, that's not going to get you past the tax of sin. And so here's how you should live if you're in relationship with me, so that it will go well with you. It doesn't go well with you if you simply don't murder one another with all your backbiting and hateful, malicious living and your slander and your irreconcilable differences. No. Kingdom people are diligent to preserve the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. And you're not righteous just because you don't put a knife in some guy's back. He goes on in Matthew chapter 5, verse 27, he said, you've heard it said, the 7th commandment, you should not commit adultery. But it's not just enough to not sleep with a woman who's not your wife. Don't live lustfully towards other people. Don't do everything but intercourse with another person. Don't tell me when you're asked the question, do you have sexual relations with that woman? Don't say, well, it depends on what is. That doesn't work with me. That's truth engineering. But I say to you, if you even look at somebody with lust in your heart, you've already violated my intention for you to pursue purity and oneness with one another. So remove anything that is causing you to be tempted to move away from the wife of your youth and from your intended love for one another. Now watch, now he's gonna get into verse 31, into the topic of marriage. And he's going to say, you have heard it said, but he doesn't quote a commandment. It's actually, if he was going through the commandments, the very next one would be, thou shalt not steal. What he's going to say is, you guys quote Moses when he commands you that when you send a woman away to give her a certificate of divorce, but what you're really doing is you have legalized wife swapping with your truth engineering. You're stealing another man's wife. You're stealing my intention of what I wanted the marriage covenant to be, and I will have none of it. This is a radical idea Jesus is teaching. It was so countercultural, and I just want to say to you this morning, what I'm teaching is going to be very countercultural. It's even Christian countercultural, because the church, in its desire to be empathetic, relevant, has truth engineered. And we have dumbed down God's intention for marriage. And today, because we have a loving God, he's going to walk us back towards what he intends us to see marriage is. And we're going to see that we have been imposing our will on the text, and we've been taking things to mean what we want them to mean so we can do what we want to do, and it doesn't go well with us. I don't know if you've looked at the implications on a society with the breakdown in family and marriage fidelity, but it is tragic and legion in its effect. Children, in fact, of parents who divorce are four times more likely to divorce. They're more prone to abuse. They're more prone to poverty. They're more prone to imprisonment. There is nothing good that comes with divorce. Now, I know you're sitting there right there going, well, he doesn't know my story. I want you to listen to me. Even in the midst of your divorce, God hates it because it's treacherous what's been done to you. And one of the things I want to insert right here is that we've got to break our little mindset that there's only two options, that you either stay miserable and married or you get divorced. There's another option. And that option is that we begin to live with a kingdom ethic. And that's what Jesus is here to do. Teach us his ethic. So let's watch this, and I'll explain to you why Jesus inserts a non-commandment here. And again, that leads to us, in effect, stealing and wife swapping from one another and stealing God's intent for us. But Matthew chapter 5, verse 31, it was said, whoever sends his wife away, let him give her a certificate of divorce. Well, where was that said? It was said in Deuteronomy chapter 24. So in Deuteronomy 24, I'm going to read to you what that is about. It is about basically sin being in the camp and the nation of Israel in an oppressive patriarchal system having men that had basically truth engineered God's intention for purity and for there not to be infidelity, to legalize wife swapping where they could move in and out of relationships with women that was treating them treacherously, that God said was an offense to him. And so Moses said, here's what we're gonna do. When a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens that she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some indecency in her. Now that word indecency is the word that caused the Pharisees to write volumes on what it meant for you to not have favor, no longer see a wife with favor because she's indecent to you. And there was two major rabbinical schools that existed during the times of Christ. Think Harvard, think Yale. Rabbis would often call people to follow them, and the quality of the student is what made the rabbi revered. And the rabbi, if he asked you, you got some sense of value by being one of that rabbinical school's selected students. And these two major schools were Shammai and Hillel. Shammai basically said indecency can only be defined as a person who's involved in a sexual act outside of marriage where there is a witness. And if you see that happen, then you can write her a certificate of divorce. Hillel said, no, not true. If you don't have favor, if she doesn't have favor anymore because she's indecent to you, she can be indecent because she gained too much weight since the marriage. She can be indecent because that woman's more decent in your eyes. She can be indecent because she burnt the toast. She can be indecent to you because she talks too loud. She can be indecent because she doesn't do the laundry the way you want to do the laundry, and you can put her out. Now, which of those two rabbinical schools do you think were the most popular during the time of Christ? The one that basically said, hey, if you think she's indecent, put her out. And Moses was saying that wasn't just, Moses was saying that was pretty popular during his time as well. And so he says this is what you got to do. when you find this indecency in her, you should write her a certificate of divorce and put it in her hand and send her out from the house. And as she leaves this house and goes and becomes another man's wife, I want you men to know this. That if the latter husband that she is married because you turned her out, turns against her and writes her certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, or if the latter husband even dies, who took her to be his wife after you sent her out, then her former husband, you, who sent her away, is not allowed to take her again to be his wife, since she's been defiled. For that's an abomination before the Lord, and you should not bring sin on the land which your Lord your God has given you as an inheritance. We're not going to legalize wife swapping. That's what they were doing. They were saying, you're indecent to me, and I want to be an adulterer, so I divorce you. And they would go over here and marry this woman and go, but you know what? I kind of like her meatloaf better than yours, and she is the mother of my children, and I do kind of like the way she runs the house, even though she's loud, so I divorce you, and I go back to this woman over here. They were legalizing wife swapping. By the way, this is not just something that Jews during the time of Moses did. Even within Sharia law today, in Islam today, if you're a Shia Islam, there's something called nikah muta, which is basically pleasure marriage, where you can have an imam who will tell you that what you can do is have a contractual marriage with a woman for an hour or 2 hours or a day, where you pay her some dowry, which is a fee, and you can have relations with her for the time frame that you arrange, so it's not prostitution, it's marriage, and then the marriage is dissolved at the level of the contract, and then you can return to your previous wife. If you're a Sunni Muslim, it's called nikah misyar, which is basically traveler's marriage, that we would never expect a man to be faithful to his wife when he has to travel and do business to faraway lands, and so we let him have a relationship with a woman while he's traveling. But it's only during that time it come back. That's still practiced within certain sects of Islam today. And God says that's a tragedy, whether you call yourself a Jew, or whether you call yourself a Muslim, or whether you call yourself a Christian, and you just divorce and remarry, and divorce and remarry, and you have serial monogamy. God says that's not the intention. So Jesus, in this Sermon on the Mount, he's just saying, you've heard the law of Moses. You heard the law of Moses, the 10 Commandments. And then you also heard what Moses did, because watch, you weren't reconciling, you didn't remove temptation, so you treated your wife treacherously. It's interesting, we're gonna get next week to where Jesus picks it up in Commandments 8, 9, and 10, and he's saying, you shall not bear false witness, right? That's actually number 9. And he says, here's the reason you're not faithful to your wife. Is because you say, well, if I make a vow, and I didn't make the vow by evoking the temple, or I didn't make a vow by evoking the name of God, or I didn't make a vow by evoking the city of Jerusalem, therefore it wasn't as serious a vow, so I can break it. And Jesus says, no, don't play these games with I swore by the temple or I swore by Jerusalem. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. The reason you divorce is because you don't reconcile, because you're lustful, because you don't mean what you say you mean, and because you covet and want something else. And so right in the middle of these commandments that we break, we have a breaking of relationship. Let me tell you, the very first casualty of sin was relationship. And the reason our marriages are not what they are meant to be today, and the reason there's treachery and sadness in the land, is because we're not kingdom people living with a kingdom ethic toward one another. We're acting murderously. And Jesus is here to correct it because he loves us. And he wants it to go well with us.